One of the most common questions that I get asked is, Ben, how do I improve my pronunciation? When I talk to people, they're like pulling faces, they're like leaning in, being like, what did you say? And I'm sick of it. I need to remove my accent. What do I do? So in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what it is that I do with these clients to improve their pronunciation in around 8 to 12 weeks so that you can move on with your life and you don't need to worry so much about pronunciation anymore. Let's jump in. First, let's set a couple of expectations. So first of all, it's going to take about 2 to 4 weeks to improve in any specific skill that we choose. So let's say, for example, you're having trouble with the TH sound. This sound in English can be pretty difficult. So it's going to take about 2 to 4 weeks of daily practice, little 5-minute activities to improve the way that you pronounce the TH sound. Once we find around 5 of these difficult areas, or these things that can have a really big impact on your speaking, we combine them together and we practice them. And then it's about 8 to 12 weeks to see a really significant improvement in your speaking ability. But once again, it's not about perfection. It's just about addressing certain sounds or certain skills that are lacking that are going to have a very big impact on your clarity and your pronunciation. Now, any pronunciation plan has to have some sort of assessment at the beginning and an assessment during and at the end as well. That relates to measurement. So we want to measure your progress over time. If there's no way to measure the progress specifically, then there's no way to know if you're improving. And lastly, we want really objective goal setting. So being really, really clear. It's like we want to improve your pronunciation, your clarity on these specific sounds over this amount of time with this amount of practice so that it's all super clear and that you don't need to think about it too much. You just got to follow the plan and do the work. Now, here's one of the really important parts to keep in mind. Clarity versus pronunciation. So when you're talking to someone and they don't understand what it is that you're saying, we often first default to thinking that, I pronounced it wrong, I said something wrong, maybe my grammar is all mixed up, whatever. And this all comes from the feedback that we've gotten over the years of learning this second language. But the reality is that there are so many factors that contribute to clarity. And so we want to make sure that we address the big ones first, the ones that have a really big impact overall, and then we dive into pronunciation. Because often pronunciation isn't the root cause or the main problem. To take an example, we would do an assessment at the beginning to see, first of all, whether there's an opportunity there to work on pace, because by slowing down your rate of speech, your speaking becomes way clearer. And then learning how to speed up your speaking in a way that still maintains that clarity. That's really important. Next, taking pauses. So being able to pause so that you can breathe, and then also giving the people that you're talking to time to absorb what it is that you're saying. Very simple, but huge impact. Volume. Maybe you're just not speaking loud enough. Maybe your pronunciation's great, but you're too quiet. Maybe the words that you're using, maybe you're trying to use certain complex words that the person you're talking to isn't familiar with in that context, and your word choice could be affecting the message that you're saying. And I put this one in, this is interesting too. So if you've studied a lot from textbooks or you read a lot, you might be using language that isn't so common colloquially. And so if you're saying it quickly, people might not understand because it's a little bit out of context. They're not used to it. Structure. So if you've never heard of communication frameworks before, then maybe the structure of your message is kind of unorganized. And maybe that's the problem that's causing a lack of clarity in your message. And then lastly, self-regulation. So maybe you're completely fine when you're talking to a friend, but then when you're nervous or you're talking to your boss, you start to talk like this and then there's a big change in your pace, and then you're not pausing, and then your volume becomes really quiet. If that's the case, then self-regulation is the key, and we want to address that so that you get more comfortable speaking in these high-stakes situations. So once again, there's a whole bunch of stuff that's not really pronunciation related, but that affects clarity. And we actually want to address these first because these have a much bigger impact on your speaking overall than addressing any specific sound, right? But if we determine that, okay, well, this isn't the root cause of the problem, then we can start to look now at pronunciation. And ideally, we want to do a mixture of both when we put together this 8 to 12 week plan. So pronunciation. Pronunciation is how accurately you produce the sounds of English. So we're looking at the individual sounds, but we're also looking at things like stress, rhythm, and intonation, where I look mostly at stress. So it's about whether your speech matches the standard patterns of the language and matches people's expectations when you're speaking. So some of the pronunciation related aspects. Number one, the first thing you can do is actually warm your mouth up and build habits of warming up your mouth. And there's a bunch of different activities that can help you with this. First one is a tongue twister. So having some tongue twisters that target maybe some of the specific sounds that are difficult for you to make in English. this can be really helpful. So let's say, for example, let's say you have trouble with the TH sound and you have trouble with the L sound and the R sound, because they're all kind of linked to some degree, and this becomes a bit of a workout for your mouth. So we practice this: red leather, yellow leather, red leather, yellow leather. And doing that just before you go into a meeting or before you have high stakes speaking can almost instantly improve your pronunciation. And it just makes you a little bit more mindful. In fact, what you're doing is slowing down a little bit. You might be taking little micro pauses between some of the words there. You might be emphasizing and moving your mouth more to make sure that these sounds are clear. And that can be enough to make sure that your clarity is there. A couple of other really cool ones. I picked this one up from Vinh Giang. So if you're not familiar with Vinh Giang, very famous speaking communication coach. But anyway, he suggests putting a pen in your... I don't have a pen here, but he suggests putting a pen in your mouth and speaking that way. I quite like the hold your tongue one because I think that it's a little bit less gross than putting a pen in my mouth. They're both kind of gross. So for example, make a start to talk like this. And this will make sure that I pronounce very, very clearly. And it makes the muscles in my mouth stronger. So this is a really powerful activity to do even just for 5 minutes a day to improve your overall pronunciation. And sometimes this is purely just doing this is enough to improve your clarity overall so that you don't have to worry about your pronunciation. And if you want to combine these two together, that's also very powerful. Red leather, yellow leather as a little warm-up. Now, a couple of other things too. So let's talk about stress. You've got word stress. So let's say, for example, instead of saying banana, you might say banana. And maybe that's the reason that people don't understand you. There are a lot of tricky word stress rules in English, especially related to nouns and verbs. So maybe that's something that needs to be addressed. Usually for most people, this isn't the core reason, but it can lead to some misunderstandings. Then we've got sentence stress. So maybe you are stressing the wrong word or you're not stressing any words in a sentence. So let's say, for example, this sentence, the dog is under the blanket. The dog is under the blanket. Here I'm sort of emphasizing the dog to make the meaning of the dog being the key target, which would imply that it's actually the dog that's under the blanket, not something else. Let's say, for example, I say, the dog is under the blanket. The meaning of this means that the dog is under the blanket, not on the blanket, not by the blanket. So the words that we stress in a sentence can have an impact on the meaning. And this gets really deep into the nuances of how we use English, and also a lot of other languages do this too. But we basically stress the one that is the new variable. And so building some patterns and some habits around how we do this is very important, can be quite helpful. The last one I'll mention is around connected speech too. So it could be useful to learn some connected speech principles. So instead of saying, are you going to go to the supermarket? We say, are you going to go to the supermarket? Right? And starting to build some of those habits because they actually sacrifice a little bit of clarity, but in context, they are easier to understand for certain people in certain countries, especially with native speakers. So these might be some of the areas that we look at. We can also address things like rhythm and intonation as well, if they are relevant. Typically at this point, if there's still a challenge, it's likely to be around the real pronunciation of the sound itself, so how you're actually making the sounds. So let's take a look. Targeted phoneme practice is what I call this, and this is really where we're looking at the individual sounds that you're having difficulty making. So for example, we said TH sound before, that's very common. Maybe it's if you're a Spanish speaker, then it's SH, sh, or CH, ch. These are often difficult depending on your native language. So really the goal is, it's very progressive. We start with the isolated sound and then we move up over time and make it more natural, more ingrained into natural speech. So we start with firstly the mouth positions. So then we say, okay, can you make the sound and do the right mouth position, tongue in the right position, etc. Then say correctly within a word. Right? So if it's TH, let's say it's the TH sound, so th. Now we're saying it correctly in a word. So this. Then we're saying the TH sound in a sentence. This is awesome. Then we're saying it correctly in a 1 to 2 minute script. So this was a really cool experiment. I really loved, even though I thought about this, blah, 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 blah. And I'm reading the script that has the TH sound kind of embedded throughout. And then lastly, asking a question and then answering and seeing whether I'm able to create that sound correctly in an impromptu speaking. And that's roughly the order that we go in. And if any of these steps becomes too difficult, we can actually break them down into smaller steps as well. But the idea is that we're starting from the very individual sound in a very purposeful manner, and then we're moving more towards it being more impromptu. And over time, with enough practice, you won't have to think about it so much anymore. So that is the 8 to 12 week intervention for pronunciation. Now, in my experience, the hardest part about all of this is sticking to the plan. It's not particularly fun, but those who actually stick to the plan and are able to do that 5 minutes of daily practice consistently, they get results. And so this is actually very hard to do on your own. And if you want a little bit of support, you want community support, or you want my help to help put this plan together, you're more than welcome to join my free community. There will be a link below. I also encourage you to download this free one-pager. I'll put a link there, so if you want that, then you can bring that to your tutor, or you can try to work through this on your own as well. The last thing I'll mention is that accents are great. Everyone has an accent. There's no such thing as a neutral accent. Really, a neutral accent is just an accent that is very clear and can be understood by a very broad range of people. So it's okay to have an accent. What you really want to focus on is clarity. Don't feel bad about your accent. In fact, I encourage you to embrace your accent. I think it's cool. It also has an advantage in making you more unique. You know, if you hear someone, as a native speaker, we hear someone with an accent. If they have an accent, but they're very clear in their speech, they become more interesting than a native speaker who just has like a generic American accent or a generic Australian accent. So you can actually use your accent as an advantage as long as your speaking is clear. That's something I really want to embrace, because I know how hard it is to go to a foreign country, speak a second or third or fourth language, and for people to not understand you. It feels terrible. But just remember, that is not the accent that is the problem. It is your clarity, and it can be fixed with a range of different interventions in 8 to 12 weeks.